15 doctors, the best money could buy, stood helpless as the billionaire's condition worsened with each passing day. The world's most brilliant medical minds had failed where a simple housekeeper would soon succeed. Something crucial had been overlooked, something that would change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. John Smith's hospital suite hummed with the quiet symphony of medical equipment. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen tanks created a backdrop to the whispered consultations happening at the foot of his bed. For the 15th time that week, a new specialist in an impeccably pressed white coat leaned over the billionaire's frail form, brows furrowed in confusion. "His symptoms don't align with any standard diagnosis," muttered Dr. Halford, the latest neurologist to be summoned to the private wing of the hospital. He joined the circle of defeated medical professionals, their collective brilliance dimmed by the mystery before them. Mary Johnson kept her movements methodical as she guided her mop across the polished floor. The housekeeper maintained a careful distance from the cluster of doctors, but her ears missed nothing. She watched as they huddled around charts and tablets, their voices growing increasingly frustrated as John's condition continued its inexplicable decline. "We've ruled out autoimmune disorders, heavy metal toxicity, and rare genetic conditions," said one physician, running a hand through his thinning hair. His liver function tests came back abnormal again this morning. The billionaire lay motionless against stark white sheets, his skin ashen and hair thinning in patches. Mary noticed how his fingers trembled even in sleep, a detail she'd been tracking privately for days. The tremors had started shortly after his advisor's visits, though none of the specialists seemed to make the connection. As she worked her way around the room, the housekeeper caught fragments of their discussion, symptoms that seemed familiar to her from a different life, one where she'd worn a lab coat instead of a uniform. Before family tragedy had derailed her education, Mary had excelled in chemistry, particularly toxicology. The pattern of John's illness triggered memories from textbooks she'd once devoured. The doctors dispersed one by one, shoulders slumped in defeat. The last specialist paused at the door, glancing back at the patient with a mixture of professional pride and frustration. "We'll reconvene tomorrow with the endocrinology team," he announced to no one in particular. Mary continued her work, invisible to them as always. She'd spent years being overlooked, first as a promising student whose circumstances forced her to abandon her studies, then as a single mother struggling to provide, and now as the woman who cleaned around the important people making important decisions. But invisibility had its advantages. She saw what they missed, the correlation between Robert Davis's visits with that distinctive black jar and the subsequent deterioration in John's condition. Her eyes narrowed as she wiped down the nightstand where the jar had sat just yesterday. The truth was screaming from the shadows, and Mary Johnson was done being silent. "You're treating the symptoms, not the cause," Mary Johnson said, her voice cutting through the clinical silence of the hospital suite. The room froze. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward her, the cleaning staff member who had dared to speak. Some faces registered pure disdain, others disbelief. Dr. Harrison's mouth actually fell open, his clipboard lowering slightly as if the gravity of such audacity had physical weight. "Excuse me?" Dr. Patel finally broke the silence, her tone suggesting Mary had committed some unforgivable breach of hospital hierarchy. Mary stood straighter, gripping her mop handle. The tremor in her hands was barely noticeable, but inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd watched these specialists circle John Smith's bed for days, their expensive educations and prestigious credentials failing to see what seemed obvious to her trained eye. "His symptoms, they follow a pattern that doesn't match what you're treating for," she continued, her voice steadier than she felt. "The peripheral neuropathy, the hair loss, the confusion, they worsen after specific interactions." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the medical team. Dr. Winters exchanged glances with Robert Davis, who stood in the corner. His polished shoes and tailored suit marking him as someone important, the billionaire's trusted advisor who never seemed to leave. "Perhaps you'd like to take over rounds tomorrow," Dr. Winters suggested, triggering more laughter. "I'm sure Harvard Medical would be fascinated by your mop-based diagnostic approach." Mary felt heat rise to her cheeks but refused to look away. She'd spent years being invisible in these halls, watching, learning, remembering fragments of knowledge from a life these doctors would never believe she'd once pursued. "You can mock me," she said quietly, "but Mr. Smith isn't getting better under your care." Robert Davis stepped forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Thank you for your concern, but I think we'll stick with the medical team." His voice was silk covering steel. "Perhaps your attention would be better focused on the floor in the East Wing." The dismissal was clear. Mary nodded once, her jaw tight, and wheeled her cleaning cart toward the door. Their arrogance was a shield they wielded expertly, their ignorance a cage they'd built themselves. But as she left, she caught John Smith's eyes following her, alert despite his weakness, a flicker of something that might have been recognition. She would be back. This wasn't over. The midnight hush of St. Vincent Memorial Hospital wrapped around Mary Johnson like a familiar blanket. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the night shift nurses making their occasional rounds. Mary slipped into the darkened break room, her cleaning cart positioned strategically outside to ward off questions. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled a worn clipboard from beneath her uniform. For weeks, she had been documenting everything about John Smith's condition, things the specialists in their pressed white coats had overlooked or dismissed. The billionaire's symptoms followed a pattern that nagged at her consciousness, demanding attention. Mary flipped through pages of meticulous notes, her finger tracing under a particular observation she'd circled 3 times. New hand cream before each decline. The correlation was unmistakable. Every time Robert Davis brought that mysterious black jar, within hours, John's vitals would plummet. "It can't be coincidence," she whispered to herself, the sound barely disturbing the stillness. The clipboard in her hands was more than just notes. It was a lifeline to a past she buried. As Mary stared at her own handwriting, memories flooded back. Advanced chemistry labs at State University, the scholarship that had promised her everything, the pride in her father's eyes when she'd declared her intention to become a research scientist. Then came the accident. Her father's death had left her alone with Sarah, just a baby then. The funeral costs, the medical bills, the impossible choice between education and survival. Mary had walked away from her dreams, folding them neatly into a box of might-have-beens. But knowledge, once gained, never truly disappears. She remembered Professor Wilson's lectures on heavy metal poisoning, the case studies they'd reviewed. The symptoms aligned too perfectly. The progressive weakness, the hair loss, the neurological symptoms that baffled John's medical team. Mary tucked the clipboard away, her mind racing. She wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was the only person who could see what was happening. The only one who understood that the black jar wasn't medicine. It was poison. "I need proof," she murmured, closing her eyes briefly. Tomorrow, she would contact Walter Brown. The retired toxicologist had been her father's closest friend, the only connection to her former life she'd maintained. If anyone would believe her, it would be Walter. Mary slipped out of the break room, her resolve hardening with each step. She might be invisible to the doctors who passed her in the hallway, but she saw everything. And what she saw now was a murder in progress. In the solitude of her tiny apartment kitchen, Mary Johnson spread her notes across the worn table. Her mind raced back to her undergraduate chemistry courses at State University before life's cruel turn had derailed her promising career. The billionaire's symptoms formed a pattern she recognized from her toxicology seminars. Thallium poisoning. Thallium, she whispered, the word itself feeling dangerous on her lips. Mary reached for her old textbook, hidden behind cookbooks on her shelf. The pages fell open to a familiar chapter, highlighting the poison's insidious nature, its ability to mimic natural disease progression. The symptoms aligned perfectly: the confusion that doctors attributed to age, the neuropathy they blamed on diabetes, and the hair loss dismissed as stress. Mary's hands trembled as she cross-referenced her observations with the medical literature. John Smith wasn't dying of natural causes. Someone was slowly killing him. She thought of the 15 specialists with their prestigious degrees and expensive equipment, all missing what was right before their eyes. Their arrogance had created the perfect blind spot. Who would suspect murder in a billionaire's hospital suite, especially when the evidence came from a housekeeper? Mary paced her small living room, heart hammering against her ribs. She needed proof, tangible, irrefutable evidence that would force even the most dismissive doctor to listen. The black jar on John's nightstand had to be the source. Each application preceded a downturn in his condition, like clockwork. "I need a sample," she murmured, formulating a plan. The night shift would be quieter, with fewer eyes watching. She could slip in during rounds, when the night nurse checked other patients. Just a small amount would be enough for testing. Mary glanced at the photo of her daughter Sarah on the refrigerator. The girl's smile reminded her why she couldn't walk away from this fight. If she could save one life by standing up, perhaps she could finally forgive herself for the one she couldn't save years ago. Determination replaced fear as Mary gathered supplies: sterile gloves, a cotton swab, and a small vial she'd borrowed from the supply closet. Tomorrow night, she would act. The wealthy and powerful might control the narrative, but they couldn't hide the truth from science. Sometimes, Mary thought, the most important battles are fought by those society has trained to be invisible: the cleaners, the helpers, the ones who move through rooms unnoticed. She would use that invisibility as her strength now, stepping from the shadows to bring light to a deadly truth. The hospital corridor stretched empty and silent at 2:30 in the morning, bathed in the dim glow of night lights. Mary Johnson moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in the shadows, her footsteps barely audible against the polished floor. Years of cleaning these halls had taught her how to become invisible when necessary. She paused at the nurse's station, noting with relief that the night nurse had stepped away, probably for a coffee break in the staff room down the hall. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. This was her moment. The door to John Smith's private suite opened without a sound. Inside, the billionaire lay motionless beneath crisp white sheets, his once robust frame now diminished. The steady beep of monitors created a rhythmic backdrop to the scene. Mary's gaze immediately fixed on the sleek black jar sitting prominently on the nightstand, the mysterious hand cream that Robert Davis brought without fail during each of his visits. "Always fresh," she whispered to herself, recalling how the advisor insisted on personally applying it to his client's skin. "Always right before he gets worse." Mary glanced at the unconscious man, feeling a surge of determination. The doctors might have missed it, but she hadn't. The pattern was too clear to ignore. Timing her movements to the cardiac monitor's steady rhythm, she pulled on a pair of latex gloves from her pocket. The jar felt cool and heavy in her palm as she carefully unscrewed the lid. The cream inside looked innocent enough, white and smooth with a faint medicinal scent. Mary extracted a small cotton swab and sample vial from her uniform pocket. With practiced precision, she dipped the swab into the cream, careful not to disturb the surface too noticeably. The cotton tip disappeared into the small glass vial, which she sealed with a tight cap. For a moment, she stood frozen, listening for any approaching footsteps. The silence remained unbroken, except for John's labored breathing and the persistent electronic beeping of medical equipment. Mary slipped the vial into an inner pocket sewn specifically for this purpose. No alarm sounded, No one burst through the door to stop her. The night continued its quiet march forward, unaware that something significant had just occurred. As she carefully replaced the jar exactly as she'd found it, Mary felt the weight of her actions. This small vial might contain proof of attempted murder, evidence that 15 specialists had overlooked while a housekeeper had seen it clearly. She slipped out of the room as quietly as she'd entered, the sample secure against her body. Mary knew she now held the key to a deadly puzzle, one that powerful people would kill to keep locked away forever. Mary Johnson's hands trembled slightly as she secured the vial in her pocket, careful not to leave any evidence of her actions. The weight of the sample felt heavier than its physical presence warranted. It potentially held proof of attempted murder. She needed Walter Brown's expertise, the retired toxicologist who had been her father's closest friend and the only person she could trust with something this dangerous. The hospital corridors seemed longer than usual as she made her exit, keeping her head down and her pace measured. Every security camera felt like an accusatory eye, though she reminded herself that housekeepers were practically invisible to most people. That invisibility, which had frustrated her for years, now served as her shield. Once outside, the night air hit her face with a welcome chill. Mary glanced at her watch, nearly 4 in the morning. Walter would be asleep, but this couldn't wait. She sent a text as she walked to her car. "Need your help. It's about what we discussed, life or death." The 20-minute drive to her apartment felt endless. Mary kept checking her rearview mirror, paranoia creeping in with every passing headlight. What if Robert Davis somehow knew? What if he had connections watching the hospital? The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the night air. Her small apartment welcomed her with silence. She locked the door, then double-checked it before placing the vial in an empty pill bottle and hiding it inside a hollowed-out book, a trick her father had taught her long ago. Only then did she sink onto her worn couch, the exhaustion of the night finally catching up with her. Sleep should have come easily, but Mary's mind raced with images. John Smith's deteriorating condition, the black jar always present before each decline, the dismissive looks from doctors when she'd tried to point out the pattern. She remembered one physician actually laughing, saying, "Stick to cleaning, honey. Medicine requires education." Their condescension burned in her memory. They'd never bothered to ask about her background, never imagined she'd once been on track for medical school before family tragedy derailed her plans. They saw only a mop, not the mind behind it. Mary stared at the ceiling, wondering if she was truly alone in this fight. Her daughter Sarah was staying with her grandmother for the week, a blessing in disguise given the danger Mary might be facing. At 5:37, her phone buzzed. Walter's name appeared on the screen, followed by 4 words that changed everything. "Come now. Bring the sample." Mary Johnson's hands trembled as she held her phone, Walter Brown's gravelly voice confirming what she had suspected all along. "The sample contains thallium, Mary. Significant amounts." "You were right," Walter said, his tone somber. "This is no accident. It's attempted murder." The words hung in the air of her small kitchen, the morning light streaming through faded curtains. Mary set the phone down on the counter, her mind racing through the implications. All those specialists in their pressed white coats, their dismissive glances when she tried to speak up, they'd missed what was right in front of them. "How long would it take to kill someone?" she asked, picking up the phone again. "With regular application through the skin? A few weeks. It's insidious, mimics many natural conditions. That's why it's the perfect poison for someone who doesn't want to get caught." Mary glanced at the refrigerator where Sarah's school photo hung, her daughter's smile bright and innocent. The 9-year-old was still asleep in the next room, unaware that her mother was stepping into something dangerous. Mary thought of their modest apartment, the life she'd built from nothing after her dreams of becoming a chemist had crumbled. She'd promised Sarah stability, safety, but some things were worth the risk. "I need to report this," she said, more to herself than to Walter. "Be careful," the toxicologist warned. Whoever's doing this has resources. This isn't some random act. Poisoning a billionaire like John Smith? There's serious money or power at stake. Mary moved to the window, watching the early morning traffic. Robert Davis's face flashed in her mind, his calculated smile, the way he always appeared with that black jar of hand cream. The connection was undeniable now. "I have a daughter to protect," she whispered. "All the more reason to tread carefully," Walter replied. "Bring me more evidence. We need to build an ironclad case before going to authorities." After ending the call, Mary stood in front of Sarah's bedroom door, watching her daughter's peaceful sleep. The child had her mother's determination, visible even in rest. Mary had already lost too much in life: her parents, her education, her dreams. She wouldn't lose her daughter, too. She quietly closed the door and went to prepare for her hospital shift. The weight of knowledge pressed down on her shoulders, but it also straightened her spine. Silence was no longer an option. John Smith might be worth billions, but every life deserved protection, even from those who thought themselves above the law. Mary tucked the vial of evidence into a hidden pocket she'd sewn into her uniform. Today would be different. Today, she would start fighting back. Dark clouds rolled across the skyline as Mary Johnson returned to Westside Memorial Hospital. Her badge clipped prominently to her uniform, shoulders squared against the weight of what she now knew. The morning shift bustled around her, nurses and doctors exchanging charts and pleasantries, oblivious to the conspiracy unfolding in their midst. Walter's warning from their early morning phone call echoed in her mind. "Whoever's doing this won't want you talking. Be careful, Mary." The retired toxicologist had confirmed her worst fears. The substance in the black jar contained thallium, a poison that mimicked natural decline so perfectly that 15 specialists had missed it. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the polished corridor toward John Smith's private suite, Mary spotted Robert Davis emerging from the billionaire's room. The advisor's tailored suit contrasted sharply with the sterile hospital environment. He nodded at her, lips curving into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Good morning," he said, voice smooth as oil. "Our patient seems a bit better today." Mary forced herself to return the greeting, her heart hammering against her ribs. She noticed his manicured hands, the same hands that had applied the poisoned cream to John's skin night after night. The housekeeper lowered her gaze, pretending to adjust supplies on her cart while Davis walked past. The pattern was undeniable now. She documented it meticulously in her hidden clipboard. Every time Robert brought the black jar, John's condition deteriorated within hours. The billionaire would experience confusion, then neuropathy, then another system would begin to fail. The doctors would scramble, order more tests, shake their heads in professional bewilderment. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was evidence. Mary glanced at her watch, calculating when Jennifer Brown would begin her shift. The charge nurse had agreed to help, but Mary needed to move carefully. One wrong step, and Davis might realize she knew. Through the partially open door, Mary could see John Smith lying against the pillows, his once powerful frame diminished. His breathing was shallow, monitored by machines that beeped steadily in the quiet room. The man who had built empires now couldn't even feed himself. Lightning flashed outside the window as Mary squared her shoulders. She had spent years being invisible, cleaning rooms while people talked around her as if she weren't there. Now, that invisibility would become her weapon. She would use it to gather evidence, to document the truth, to save a life. Mary pushed her cart forward, determination hardening in her chest. She was ready to act. Mary Johnson slipped into John Smith's hospital suite, her footsteps nearly silent against the polished floor. The morning light filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting long shadows across the room. The billionaire lay motionless, connected to machines that beeped steadily, monitoring his fragile condition. Her eyes immediately locked onto the nightstand where a fresh black jar sat unopened. The same type Robert Davis always brought before John's condition mysteriously deteriorated. She glanced at the door, then quickly pulled on a pair of latex gloves from her cleaning cart. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached not for the new jar, but for the previous one tucked behind the water pitcher. This wasn't part of her job description, but Mary knew that evidence disappearing was becoming a pattern in this hospital. This might be the only proof, she whispered to herself, carefully wrapping the used jar in a clean cloth before hiding it beneath the trash liner in her cart. If Walter could test this one too, they'd have a stronger case, a lifeline if someone discovered the first sample she'd taken. The housekeeper finished her routine cleaning with practiced efficiency, all while her mind raced with possibilities and dangers. No one questioned her presence. She was invisible to them, just another worker maintaining the pristine environment expected for a man of John's status. Later, during her break, Mary pushed through the door to the staff room, eager for a moment to collect her thoughts. The small space was mercifully empty, the scent of burnt coffee hanging in the air. She headed toward her usual spot in the corner, freezing when she noticed something on the table. A folded piece of paper with her name scrawled across it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing a message in block letters: "Stop asking questions. Stay in your lane." Mary's breath caught. Someone knew. Someone was watching. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer. She glanced at the security camera in the corner. Was it recording now? Had it captured whoever left this warning? Fear crawled up her spine, but as she reread the threatening note, something shifted inside her. The initial panic gave way to a hardened resolve. She thought of her daughter Sarah, of her father who had taught her to stand up for what was right, of John Smith lying helpless as poison slowly claimed his life. Mary crumpled the note and shoved it into her pocket. She was already in too deep to turn back now. Whatever consequences came, facing them seemed less frightening than living with the knowledge that she could have saved a life, but chose to look away instead. The hospital basement was eerily quiet at 2 in the morning. Mary Johnson moved silently through the dimly lit archives, her footsteps muffled by worn carpet tiles. She'd waited until the night shift was deep into their routines when the security guard made his predictable coffee run. Her fingers traced file labels, heart pounding with each creak from the old building. Finally, she found what she was looking for, the administrative records section. Mary pulled out a thick binder of supply requisitions, flipping through pages with practiced efficiency. There it was, Robert Davis's signature, appearing again and again. The advisor had authorized special deliveries for John's care, always with peculiar specificity. Patient-requested personal care items, read one form. Specialized therapeutic cream, noted another. Every delivery coincided with a downturn in the billionaire's condition. "Gotcha," Mary whispered, snapping photos with her smartphone. She documented everything: dates, signatures, the recurring mention of the black jar labeled as proprietary formula. More disturbing were the personnel forms. Davis was listed as an emergency contact with extraordinary access privileges, unusual for someone who wasn't family or medical staff. He'd even signed off on staff rotations, ensuring certain nurses were reassigned away from John's care. Mary's hands trembled slightly as she photographed a document showing Davis had personally rejected 3 different dermatology consultations requested by attending physicians. The pieces were fitting together in a terrifying pattern. A noise from the corridor froze her in place. She quickly returned the files, slipping behind a tall shelf as a janitor passed by. When silence returned, Mary exhaled slowly, knowing she couldn't do this alone anymore. She needed an ally, someone with medical credentials and access to areas she couldn't reach. Jennifer Brown came to mind immediately. The charge nurse had been vocal about administrative overreach after her brother's misdiagnosis last year. Jennifer had the expertise and, more importantly, the moral courage to help. As Mary carefully made her way back upstairs, she composed a message in her head. This wasn't just about saving one wealthy man anymore. The evidence suggested Robert had manipulated the entire system, possibly endangering other patients. If he could silence doctors and redirect care for someone as powerful as John Smith, what else might he be capable of? By dawn, Mary had formulated her approach. She'd leave a note in Jennifer's locker, casual enough to seem innocent, specific enough to signal urgency. Coffee at Rosie's diner after shift? Need advice about skincare products. It was time to build an alliance that could withstand whatever storm was coming. The corner booth at Sal's diner offered just enough privacy for what Mary Johnson needed to do. Outside, streetlights flickered against the evening drizzle, while inside, the clatter of dishes and murmured conversations provided perfect cover. Mary had chosen this place carefully, far enough from the hospital to avoid prying eyes, yet public enough to feel safe. Jennifer Brown arrived 5 minutes late, rain droplets clinging to her dark hair. The charge nurse slid into the booth with practiced casualness, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her anxiety. "I can't stay long," Jennifer said, wrapping her hands around the coffee mug the waitress had just filled. "Night shift starts in 40 minutes. Mary nodded, understanding the risk Jennifer was taking just by being here. "Thank you for coming." She glanced around before reaching for her phone, unlocking it with trembling fingers. "What you said earlier about Robert Davis, I thought you might be overreacting," Jennifer admitted. "But something about him has always felt off." Mary slid her smartphone across the table. "Look at these. All of them." Jennifer's eyes widened as she scrolled through the carefully documented evidence. Photos of the black jar, timestamps of Davis's visits matched with John Smith's sudden declines, Walter's preliminary findings on the cream sample, and hospital records showing the pattern no one had bothered to see. "My God," Jennifer whispered, her professional composure cracking. This is attempted murder. Right under everyone's noses. Thallium poisoning," Mary confirmed. Walter confirmed it. The symptoms match perfectly. The hair loss, the neurological issues, the confusion. The doctors keep treating individual symptoms while missing the cause. Jennifer continued scrolling, her coffee going cold and forgotten. How did 15 specialists miss this? How did I miss this? "Because no one suspects the hand cream," Mary explained, "and no one watches the housekeeper, who sees everything." "We have to act," Mary whispered, her voice trembling but determined. She thought of her daughter Sarah, asleep at the babysitter's house. If she backed down now, what lesson would that teach? John Smith doesn't deserve to die because someone wants his patents. Jennifer set the phone down, decision made. "I can order toxicology screens. Not the standard panel. They'd notice that. But I can add thallium testing to his routine blood work. The lab owes me a favor." "You'd do that?" "Someone has to," Jennifer replied. "I became a nurse to save lives, not watch them slip away while looking the other way." They finalized their plan over the last sips of coffee. Jennifer would secure the samples. Mary would document everything. Two women from different worlds, united by the simple belief that justice shouldn't depend on wealth or title. Mary Johnson found the folded note tucked between clean towels in the linen closet, her heart skipping as she unfolded it. "Test ordered. Keep quiet." The handwriting was unmistakably Jennifer's, small, precise, and slightly slanted. A flutter of hope rose in her chest as she quickly pocketed the paper and resumed her cleaning duties, careful to keep her expression neutral under the watchful eyes of the hospital's security cameras. At precisely 1:45 in the morning, when the hospital corridor lights dimmed to their night setting, Mary positioned herself near the supply closet with a perfect view of John Smith's suite. The billionaire lay motionless, surrounded by the soft beeping of monitors that had become the soundtrack to his mysterious decline. Jennifer Brown appeared at the end of the hallway, her nurse's shoes making barely a sound on the polished floor. The charge nurse moved with practiced efficiency, clipboard in hand, as if performing routine checks. Only Mary noticed the slight bulge in her scrub's pocket, the collection kit they had discussed. Through the partially open door, Mary watched as Jennifer leaned over the sleeping patient. "Mr. Smith, I need to take some routine samples," she explained in a professional tone, though the billionaire remained unresponsive. With gloved hands, the nurse drew blood with expert precision, the crimson liquid filling the vial. She then carefully took skin samples from areas where Robert Davis had applied the suspicious cream, labeling each specimen with meticulous attention to detail. Mary's breath caught when a night security guard passed by, but Jennifer simply nodded at him, her demeanor so natural that he continued his rounds without a second glance. 20 minutes later, Mary entered the staff stairwell, her cleaning cart positioned to block the security camera's view. Jennifer appeared moments later, her steps hurried but not suspicious. Their exchange was choreographed to look like a casual encounter, Jennifer passing a coffee cup that concealed a small case containing the precious vials. "Regular tests won't detect it," Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the building's ventilation system. "I've labeled them for specialized toxicology." Mary's fingers closed around the cup, feeling the weight of what it contained. "Walter will know what to look for," she replied, thinking of the retired toxicologist waiting for her call. They parted without another word, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The nurse returned to her station, while Mary continued her rounds, the coffee cup now safely hidden in her cart's supply compartment. As dawn approached, Mary couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The stakes were escalating with every passing hour. Someone powerful wanted John Smith dead, and now two women stood in the way of that plan. Walter Brown hunched over his microscope in the early morning light, his weathered hands moving with the precision that had made him one of the country's most respected toxicologists before retirement. The samples Jennifer had collected from John Smith sat before him, meticulously labeled and arranged. Mary Johnson watched anxiously, her fingers twisting the hem of her uniform. "There it is," Walter finally said, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of experience. He straightened his back and gestured for Mary to look at the results displayed on his computer screen. "Elevated thallium levels, chronic poisoning. This is irrefutable." Mary's breath caught in her throat. The confirmation of her suspicions should have brought relief, but instead, it filled her with dread. The retired toxicologist printed the report, sliding it into a manila folder with several highlighted sections. "Robert Davis has been slowly killing him," she whispered, the words hanging heavy in the air of Walter's modest home laboratory. "But why would he do this to John?" "Money, power, revenge. Pick one," Walter replied, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "Whatever the reason, you've got solid evidence now. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Mary drove home with the folder pressed to her chest, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The morning sun painted the city in golden hues, people hurrying to work, children waiting for school buses, a world unchanged on the surface, but fundamentally altered beneath her feet. The weight of knowledge pressed down on her shoulders. She parked outside her apartment building, sitting motionless as her mind raced through the implications. If she stepped forward, she would face powerful enemies. Robert's connections ran deep. She'd seen how hospital administrators deferred to him, how security guards nodded respectfully when he passed. Her thoughts drifted to Sarah, her daughter, still asleep at home. What example would she set by staying silent? What danger might she bring by speaking up? Mary clutched the folder tighter. She was no longer just a housekeeper who had noticed something odd. She was the whistleblower, holding the fate of lives in her hands. John's immediate life, certainly, but also the lives of future victims if Robert went unpunished. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Any news?" Mary stared at the message, feeling the weight of her next decision. She had crossed an invisible line, transformed from observer to participant. There would be no going back now. With trembling fingers, she typed her response. "Yes, we need to meet. Today." Mary Johnson clutched the water bottle with its false bottom as she walked through the hospital's sliding doors. Inside that hidden compartment lay the toxicology reports, irrefutable evidence of thallium poisoning. Her heart raced with each step, knowing that what she carried could save John Smith's life and expose Robert Davis's sinister plot. The hallways seemed different today. Every security camera felt like an eye following her movements. Every passing orderly or nurse might be reporting back to Davis. She nodded casually to a colleague, fighting to maintain her composure while carrying such dangerous knowledge. "Morning, Mary," called Jennifer from the nurse's station. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The charge nurse had risked everything to help obtain those samples, and now they were both in the crosshairs. After finishing her shift, Mary drove home to her modest apartment, exhaustion settling into her bones. She needed to review Walter's notes once more before meeting him tomorrow. The retired toxicologist had been meticulous in his analysis, confirming what she had suspected all along. When she reached her door, something felt wrong. The lock appeared untouched, but Mother's intuition screamed danger. Mary pushed the door open slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Her apartment had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, cushions slashed, papers scattered across the floor. This wasn't a random burglary. It was a message. Her hands trembled as she moved through the chaos, checking first that no one remained inside. On her kitchen table lay a single folded note. "You're not a doctor. Stop pretending." The handwriting was neat, controlled, just like Robert's smile when he passed her in the hallway. Mary sank into a chair, the paper crumpling in her fist. They knew. Somehow, they knew what she was doing. Her thoughts immediately flew to Sarah, her daughter, safely at a sleepover tonight. Thank goodness for small mercies. She shredded the threatening note methodically, watching the pieces fall like snow. Fear coursed through her veins, but it quickly hardened into something stronger. Determination. She'd faced worse than this. After losing her scholarship, after burying her dreams of becoming a chemist, after raising a child alone, Mary had learned to survive. She reached for her phone and called Walter Brown. "They broke into my place," she whispered, scanning the room for hidden devices. "I need somewhere safe to keep the evidence." "Come here," the toxicologist replied without hesitation. "They don't know about me yet." Mary packed a small bag, her hands still shaking, but her resolve unbroken. This wasn't just about John Smith anymore. This wasn't even about justice. This was about proving that people like her, overlooked, underestimated, pushed to the margins, still mattered. She was fighting for herself now, and that made her dangerous. Jennifer Brown passed Mary a manila folder in the dimly lit stairwell, her face pale in the fluorescent light. The charge nurse's hands trembled slightly as she released her grip on the documents. "This will bury them," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "The toxicology report confirms everything you suspected. Thallium levels through the roof." Mary Johnson clutched the folder to her chest, feeling the weight of the evidence inside. For a moment, relief washed over her. Validation after days of being dismissed and threatened. But the feeling was fleeting. "Thank you," Mary said, "but I don't think this will be enough." Jennifer's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean? It's scientific proof." "Burke's connections run deep," Mary explained, lowering her voice as footsteps echoed somewhere above them. "Haven't you noticed how security cameras mysteriously go dark whenever Robert Davis visits John's room? How records vanish from the system?" The nurse nodded slowly, realization dawning across her features. "Last week, I couldn't find 3 days of vitals for Mr. Smith. The digital records were just gone." "Exactly. The hospital walls are closing in tighter every day." Mary carefully slid the folder into the false bottom of her water bottle, a trick she'd learned from necessity. "They'll claim the samples were contaminated or that I tampered with them." Jennifer leaned against the concrete wall, defeat momentarily crossing her face. "So what do we do?" Mary's mind raced through possibilities, weighing risks against rewards. Walter Brown had warned her that powerful people would fight back hard. Her thoughts drifted to her daughter, Sarah, sleeping safely at home, unaware of the dangerous game her mother was playing. "We need more," Mary finally said, determination hardening her voice. "We need to catch him in the act." Robert Davis applying that poisoned cream. Irrefutable evidence that even Judge Grant could take straight to prosecution. "You're talking about surveillance," Jennifer whispered. "That's incredibly risky." Mary nodded. "I know someone who can help us set up a hidden camera, small enough to go unnoticed." The stairwell door above them creaked open, and both women tensed. Mary quickly adjusted her cleaning uniform as Jennifer grabbed her stethoscope, both adopting casual postures. A doctor passed by, barely glancing their way, just a housekeeper and a nurse, invisible as always. When he was gone, Mary met Jennifer's eyes. "Tomorrow night," she said firmly. "We'll only get one chance at this." Jennifer nodded, her professional resolve returning. "I'll make sure you have access to his suite." As they parted ways, Mary felt the familiar weight of fear and determination settling in her chest. The path ahead was dangerous, but the alternative, letting a billionaire die while a murderer walked free, was unthinkable. Mary Johnson's hands trembled slightly as she positioned the tiny camera inside the disinfectant container. The hospital corridor was eerily quiet, with only the distant beeping of monitors and the occasional squeak of shoes on polished floors. She had borrowed the surveillance device from Walter, who'd kept it from his days working with law enforcement. "Just be careful," he'd warned, his eyes reflecting concern for the housekeeper who'd become like family. The disguised camera offered a perfect view of John Smith's bed and the nightstand where the infamous black jar always sat. Mary positioned it carefully, adjusting the angle before stepping back to survey her work. To anyone passing by, it looked like ordinary cleaning supplies, invisible, just like she had been to the doctors who dismissed her concerns. She completed her regular cleaning duties with meticulous attention, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. What if Robert didn't come tonight? What if the camera failed? What if she was caught? The weight of Sarah's future pressed heavily on her shoulders. Her daughter needed her mother, not a hero in prison. The night stretched endlessly as Mary found reasons to remain at the hospital past her shift. She volunteered for extra work, cleaned areas that didn't need cleaning, and finally settled in a supply closet down the hall from John's suite. Through a crack in the door, she maintained her vigil, fighting exhaustion with determination. At exactly 3:12 in the morning, Robert Davis appeared at the end of the hallway. Mary's breath caught in her throat as she watched the advisor check his surroundings before slipping into John's room. Unlike his daytime visits, there was no friendly smile, no casual confidence, just calculated precision. Through the narrow opening, Mary observed as Robert pulled on latex gloves with practiced efficiency. The billionaire lay unconscious, vulnerable, as his trusted advisor reached for the black jar. With methodical movements, Robert applied the cream to John's exposed skin, wrists, neck, behind the ears, places where the poison would absorb quickly into the bloodstream. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs so loudly she feared it might give away her position. She pressed a hand to her mouth to silence her breathing as Robert completed his deadly ritual, carefully wiped his fingerprints from the jar, and departed as silently as he'd arrived. When the corridor emptied, Mary waited 10 more minutes before retrieving the camera with shaking hands. The evidence was captured, irrefutable proof of attempted murder happening right under everyone's noses. She clutched the device to her chest, tears of relief and fear mingling on her cheeks. This tiny piece of technology held the power to bring down Robert Davis and save John Smith's life. The final piece of the puzzle was now in her possession, and there was no turning back. Walter Brown's hands trembled slightly as he rewound the footage for the third time. The evidence was undeniable. Robert Davis methodically applying the poisoned cream to John Smith's exposed skin, his movements practiced and deliberate. The retired toxicologist removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is it, Mary. This is everything we need," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent identifying poisons and their effects. "But hospital administration won't listen to us alone. We need someone with authority, someone they can't ignore." Mary Johnson leaned against the kitchen counter, exhaustion etched into her face. The past weeks had transformed her from an invisible housekeeper to a woman carrying dangerous knowledge. She watched as Walter rummaged through an old address book, its pages yellowed with time. "Margaret Grant," he announced, scribbling a number on a notepad. "Retired judge, known for her integrity. We worked on several cases together years ago." He slid the paper across the table. "She's formidable, Mary. If anyone can help us navigate this legally, it's her." The following afternoon, Mary drove to an elegant brownstone in the historic district. Her heart pounded as she clutched the folder containing all their evidence, the toxicology reports, the video. Her meticulous notes of John's symptoms. Sarah's face flashed in her mind, reminding her why she couldn't back down now. Judge Grant answered the door herself, a tall woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her home smelled of old books and brewing tea. Every surface held either legal volumes or framed photographs of what Mary assumed were family members. "Walter said you needed help with something urgent," Margaret said, gesturing toward a leather armchair. "He mentioned poisoning and corruption, which certainly got my attention." Mary placed the evidence on the coffee table between them. "A billionaire is being slowly murdered in plain sight, and 15 doctors have missed it," she explained. Her voice steadier than she felt. For the next hour, Judge Grant reviewed everything. The video footage, the toxicology reports, the threatening notes. She asked pointed questions about chain of custody and documentation methods. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes grew increasingly intense. Finally, she closed the folder and looked directly at Mary. "In 40 years on the bench, I've seen corruption in many forms. But this..." She shook her head. "You've done remarkable work, especially considering the risks." Margaret Grant stood, suddenly looking every bit the formidable judge she once was. "With me by your side, they will listen," she assured Mary, her eyes fierce with purpose. "We'll need to move quickly. People like Robert Davis have resources, and they'll use them once they realize what we know." Mary nodded, feeling for the first time that justice might actually be possible. Mary Johnson stood in the precinct's fluorescent-lit hallway, clutching the folder of evidence against her chest. Judge Margaret Grant's presence beside her was like a shield. The retired judge's reputation had indeed opened doors that would have remained firmly shut to a housekeeper. Detective Paul Miller greeted them with a firm handshake, his weathered face revealing nothing as he led them to a small conference room. "Judge Grant said this was urgent," he said, gesturing to the chairs. Mary spread the evidence across the table, the toxicology reports, the photos of hospital records, and finally, the flash drive containing the damning footage. The detective's expression remained neutral as he methodically reviewed each piece, but his eyes narrowed when he watched Robert Davis applying the poisoned cream to John Smith's skin. "This is methodical, calculated," Miller said, rewinding the footage to watch it again. "And you verified the substance contains thallium?" Mary nodded. "Walter Brown confirmed it independently. The levels in John's system are consistent with chronic poisoning over weeks." The detective leaned back, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "We move smart. We move quiet," he promised, his voice lowered. "If Davis has the connections you suspect, we need to build an airtight case before making any moves." While Miller began the paperwork for a formal investigation, Mary received an urgent call from Jennifer Brown. The nurse's voice trembled with excitement. "He's awake, Mary. John Smith is lucid for the first time in days." Mary rushed to the hospital, arriving to find the billionaire pale but alert, his eyes recognizing her immediately. "You're the one who stopped them," he rasped, reaching for her hand. It was Davis. With John's permission, and Detective Miller's blessing, Mary visited the billionaire's mansion that afternoon. The estate's security chief, briefed on the situation, led her to John's home office. There, in a hidden safe whose combination John had shared, Mary found what they needed: contracts revealing the true motive. Her hands trembled as she photographed each page. The documents showed that ownership of 3 revolutionary medical patents would transfer to Robert Davis if John died within the year. The patents' estimated value, $400 million. Mary secured the contracts in her bag and texted Walter. Found the motive. Patents worth millions. As she left the mansion, Mary felt a strange calm settle over her. The invisible housekeeper had assembled the pieces that 15 specialists had missed. Now, with Judge Grant's authority, Detective Miller's resources, and John Smith's testimony, justice was finally within reach. The trap was set. All they needed was for Robert Davis to make one more move. The hospital corridors seemed unnaturally quiet as Mary Johnson and Detective Miller carefully documented the evidence. They photographed the black jar, now sealed in an evidence bag, and collected the remaining samples Walter had prepared. Mary's hands trembled slightly, but her resolve remained unshaken. "Almost done," Detective Miller whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of medical equipment. The elevator chimed down the hall. Mary's heart froze as Robert Davis emerged, flanked by 2 security guards. His typically composed face twisted with rage when he spotted her. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, striding forward. "This woman has been harassing Mr. Smith and stealing hospital property. Detain her immediately." The security guards moved forward, hands reaching for their radios. Mary stepped back, clutching the evidence folder to her chest. "That won't be necessary," Detective Miller said calmly, revealing his badge. "Paul Miller, Homicide Division. Ms. Johnson is assisting in an official investigation." Robert's face paled. "This is a private medical facility. You have no jurisdiction." "Actually, he does," came a commanding voice from behind them. Margaret Grant emerged from the stairwell, her posture straight and authoritative despite her age. "I've authorized a warrant for all materials related to Mr. Smith's care, including that hand cream you've been so diligently applying." The retired judge handed Robert a document. "Judge Ellison signed it an hour ago. The hospital administration has already been notified." The security guards exchanged uncertain glances, their loyalty visibly wavering. "This is absurd," Robert hissed, but his confident facade was crumbling. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Oh, but we do," Mary said, finding her voice. "We know exactly who you are and what you've done." That confrontation was merely the beginning. By dawn, police were raiding Robert's residence and office. They discovered vials of thallium, financial records linking him to offshore accounts, and documents outlining his plan to acquire John's patents once the billionaire succumbed to his mysterious illness. Within 24 hours, the story exploded across news outlets. "Billionaire targeted in elaborate poisoning plot," read the headlines. Security footage showed Robert being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit unable to mask his disgrace. For Mary, watching from the hospital where John was now recovering, the vindication was bittersweet. Reporters clamored for interviews with the heroic housekeeper, a title she found both flattering and reductive. "They never saw you," Jennifer said, joining her at the window. "But now the whole world is watching," Mary nodded, thinking of her daughter, of Walter's unwavering support, of all the people who had helped her fight when the system failed. The truth had finally come to light, and nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom fell silent as Mary Johnson took the stand. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she recounted the evidence she'd gathered. The prosecution had arranged everything meticulously. The poisoned cream samples, the toxicology reports, the hidden camera footage that captured Robert Davis applying the deadly substance to John Smith's skin. From her seat, Mary could see Robert's face hardening with each piece of evidence presented. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear. But the advisor's composure was cracking. Behind him sat hospital administrators who had dismissed her concerns, their expressions now a mixture of shame and disbelief. The defendant systematically poisoned Mr. Smith with thallium, the prosecutor stated, pointing to the black jar now sealed in an evidence bag, a substance that, as our witness discovered, was slowly killing him while experts overlooked the obvious signs. John Smith himself sat in the gallery, still weakened but recovering. The billionaire nodded at Mary when their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of the debt he could never fully repay. Beside him, Jennifer Brown squeezed Mary's daughter Sarah's hand supportively. Walter Brown testified next, his decades of toxicology experience lending weight to his analysis. The levels were unmistakable, he explained, pointing to charts displayed for the jury, consistent with intentional poisoning over several weeks. Judge Margaret Grant presided with unwavering attention, her reputation for fairness evident in how she managed the high-profile case. Detective Miller sat with the prosecution team, his meticulous police work having transformed Mary's evidence into an airtight case. When the defense attempted to paint Mary as an unqualified meddler, the prosecutor countered with her academic transcripts, the chemistry scholarship she'd abandoned after family tragedy, the knowledge that had lain dormant until this moment. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. On all counts of attempted murder and conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty, the foreman announced. The courtroom erupted. Robert was led away in handcuffs, his face ashen. The patents he'd schemed to obtain would remain with their rightful owner. After the verdict, Mary stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters, but looking only at Sarah. The housekeeper who had been invisible for so long was now impossible to ignore. "I just saw what needed to be seen," she told a journalist who asked about her courage. That evening, as Mary tucked her daughter into bed, she felt something shift inside her. She had crossed an invisible line between observer and defender, between silence and truth. In saving one man's life, she had reclaimed her own voice and reminded the world that justice doesn't belong exclusively to those with wealth or power. Sometimes it comes from the hands that clean up after them.